I guess we're going to be streaming about this particular topic here. It's going to be UI UX design in the age of restaurants in 2021. Restaurants in COVID, that is, because like the thing about these days is that people need to eat, people go to restaurants, and people are making apps for these restaurants, and they're trying to develop technology to solve the problems of today. And as developers, we have, I mean, less of a responsibility and more of a intentionally shouldered burden of helping with these problems and trying to solve them as best we can. We're providing tools and we're trying to help out in this way that feels like it's under our control. It's ultimately a lot outside of our control, but we're doing what we can. And so in this presentation, we're going to cover a few things. We're going to cover methods and really context for ways that we can help out, because a lot of these problems are very not necessarily nuanced, but they're tricky. It's a very confusing time. It's a very difficult to. It's a very vague time almost because, you know, I mean, how many billions of us are there on the planet? How many different responses are there possible? There's no answer to that. So you're just spitballing here, but we're gonna try because trying is the important part. So a little bit of background on me. My name is Nolan Dost. This is a little bit about my past. I was born in California. Around 2015, I moved up here to Redmond, Washington, right near the Redmond Science Center, the Redmond High School, Redmond STEM Center, that is, sorry. One of my first jobs was in restaurants. I worked at the sardine factory for about 8 months to a year. 8 months is closer. And it was fine dining, right? This is right in the tourist heart of California's Cannery Row. I had this opportunity to learn at around age 16 that it's all about the experience. It's all about the user, and it's all about this customer that's coming to you for a quality experience. I mean, when you go to fine dining, you're there to be impressed by something. You're there to be wowed by extravagance, and you have to remember that as a member of the staff, you are giving that to them. Your job is to be an actor, and so you got to act. And the only reason I ever left the sardine factory was to go to DigiPen. DigiPen is here in Redmond. It was the college that I attended. It's this developer academy, this institution of technology where games and development are just they're our life. It's this environment where you're completely engrossed in development practices. Every professor you have is somehow this notable member of the development community. Um, oh God, some of them are working right now. You've probably played some of their games. And while I was there, I also got the chance to do some bartending over in the Guilt Trip here in Redmond. And just like with the sardine factory, your job is to act when you're on a job. Your job is to provide a service. And when you provide those services and when you do a good job at it, I mean, people really notice. They make sure that they tell you that you did a good job, and people respond to your service. And also the reason why I left that job is because I got an internship at Activision Blizzard. I went down to Santa Monica. I managed to do I think it was a marketing technology internship where I got the chance to work on the Call of Duty companion app for the Black Ops 4 release. It's a lot of fun. Learned a lot. And right now I work on the Microsoft's Xbox store, where I do some analysis on some current titles, and most of that's NDA, so I can't really talk about it. But let's move into our topic today, which is going to be directed empathy. And I coined that term mostly because one, it's a catchy title, and two, because it's the all-encompassing way of describing this very abstract problem that all developers are trying to solve. And remember, there is no one solution. Design is a form of art, And there is no perfect art. It's all about application. So this is going to be the basis for the talk. These 3 resources, and every single one of these is going to be available on major retail sites. Amazon is primarily how I was able to access Creative Confidence, Amazon Audible specifically. Creative Confidence, Design of Everyday Things, got those in Audible. Laws of Simplicity, I have it right here. And these are Bibles. They're completely essential. They're so useful. And the incredible thing is they're not necessarily for developers. You might think that these types of skills aren't transferable, but design is good design everywhere. There's something so universal about good design. It's an element of like polish that expresses itself uniquely in every project. It expresses itself uniquely when you design a tea kettle, for example. If you look at the cover of the Design of Everyday Things, it's common sense. It's creating common sense. How do you do that? It depends on the project. So, let's define some basic laws here. Let's define some very key concepts that we're going to return to and we're going to reference a ton during this talk. So, the first one I want to touch on is empathy, because, I mean, since the beginning of the stream, the title of the stream is Directed Empathy. You have to remain aware of your user. It's essential. It's completely necessary. And when you're developing a product, you have to remind yourself of the user and their needs at every stage of development. How do they respond to a feature? How do they respond to the way that you're treating them as a user? It's essential to remember it. It's like this mantra that you repeat to yourself. It's this frame of mind that you continually return to. What does the user think right now? How are they perceiving it? You return to this. It's not some static answer. It's a coat of paint you continually apply. A polish rag you continually buff over the project with. What is the user feeling? What is the user thinking? How can you remain empathetic to them? So the second one, the second term that we're going to be defining here is an affordance. So this is a term that we use quite heavily in DigiPen. An affordance is essentially an option for a user. It's a way that they can navigate your system and then attempt to solve their problems and their goals. Because when a user wants to go and use your project or your product, or they're in communication with you as a developer, they're usually trying to solve a problem. They're trying to get from point A, which is their defined starting point usually, to get to point B, which is either their solution or some abstract nexus between their solution and your solution, which could hypothetically mean you afford them the opportunity to be sold products. So say that they want to use your product to order food, for example. You order food from an app. I mean, these are COVID times. You want to eat at home. You want to stay away from other people. You want to minimize contact. But say in that journey from no food to ordering food, you, as a developer, afforded them the opportunity to subscribe to a service that allows them to receive coupons or to receive weekly news updates about, well, the restaurant, about really anything. You're giving them the option. It doesn't necessarily mean they'll take it. That's another matter entirely. But you've allowed them to do that. And that's an essential term to remember, and I want to continually come back to that term. And the last one that I want to cover, the last term that I want to cover is contrast. Now, contrast is generally considered a graphic design term. It is a graphic design term, but it also represents the difference and a vague but heavily perceptual difference between either a piece of information or a block of information or one element of a display or product and another. It's very vague, and it's almost a nebulous concept that entirely depends on the physical perception of something. So it's important to consider differences in people's perceptions. Recently, it's been fairly common for developers to include colorblind modes, and those types of advances are so important because you need to accommodate and you need to accept that there are going to be different perceptions of your product, and you need to create contrast in ways that people can perceive and consistently perceive. If there is a subsection of a population that can't perceive the contrast of the product that you're doing, that you're creating, there's an issue. So, just to get back on topic here, these three terms, they're like framing devices, and we're going to be returning to them frequently. They are essential. They're the language of the design that we're going to be discussing today. And they're the language that when you adopt, you'll find yourself speaking in these terms. You'll find yourself viewing your development efforts in these terms, and your products will improve. You just remember these terms because the application of them is where you'll determine whether you're a good designer or a bad designer. And there is no good or strictly bad design. I mean, there often is quite obviously bad design, but it's hard to qualitatively assert something is one way or the other. So we're going to move on here. I want to distinguish some things here real quick because UI and UX are two terms that need to be distinguished between. Often we will say that we work within realms of UI and UX, but they're not the same thing. UI is the column on the left. It's aesthetics, it's cleanliness, it's purely digital, and it's art. Whereas UX, user experience, and UI is user interface, user experience is effectiveness. It's the clarity of an experience. It's the almost entire A to B experience, whereas I would say UI is a moment-to-moment sort of enhancement of a user experience. This is a hard concept for even professionals to consistently express. So when we go into more examples, you'll understand the implications here. And see, this last term on the UX quality column here is Affordances. That is the first time that we're going to be tying in those terms that I mentioned just before. Affordances are a UX speciality. You can splice up a menu and make certain affordances more bold or subtle, and that's an art problem, that's an aesthetics problem, but an affordance is there regardless of the art or not. If you can do something, the fact remains that you can do it, and that is not entirely without its UI as like let me restart that sentence. UI is a influencing factor, but it is a UX problem and a UI problem. We're just getting into technicalities here. For right now, just remember, affordances are a UX problem that then become UI. Complicated, but we'll get back to it. Before we start into this, I'm going to take a quick swig of water here. Okay, so we're going to start in on one of my favorite images, and it's an image that you can dissect from the lens of UX and design in general. Because, I had said that user interface is the aesthetics aspect of design, but let's just extrapolate that concept to real life. Let's say that the visual misspoke that the visual aspects of a park can almost be equated to the UI of the park. It's the aesthetics of the park. Let's just go with that assumption. But the UX of this park is the flow between where a user, or in this case the pedestrian, enters the park and then the place that they want to exit the park. And now in this image you see the two paths. There's the intended path and then there's the UX path. We know as designers that the user, this pedestrian, is looking to go from close to where we are in relationship to the bottom left. That was a weird, confusing way of saying that, but they're going from the bottom left to the top center. That dirt path, that's the way that they want to go. But if we notice something very important here about the construction of this park, we'll notice that the user is afforded the ability to step over this path. Now, this might not seem as significant of a decision as you might imagine, but I would assure you that it is. Because what the designers have neglected is that the affordance of being able to step over this path was given to the user. It's not an unintentional decision. Design is intention, okay? You, as a designer, control that intention. And as a park designer, when you allow a user the ability to step over a little step, you have created the path. The path could be whatever the user wants. In this case, it's the dirt path. But they are allowed to do it. That is the key. They are allowed to do it. What they should have done instead, if they didn't want this dirt path to open up and they didn't want to waste all the money on landscaping, because inevitably that lawn is going to be either, renewed with new lawn that it will eventually be trampled over, or, whatever decision they come up with, they could have just raised that step up by a foot. The effort that would have been required to step over and into this pathway is not necessarily a whole lot more than most people are willing to put in, but it's enough to stop people from immediately just assuming that it's going to be the easiest option. Most people will just walk around and go about their day. It's an affordance. It's the perspective that you need to take. What do I, as a user, want to do? I want to get from point A to point B. How do you control that as a designer? It's about control. It's about affordances, which is control itself. You need to remember this, because if a user is going to completely ignore your highly profitable feature that's designed to be the bread and butter of your profit machine that you're looking to create, you have failed as a designer. If they can just completely just ignore that feature, who can blame anyone but you? You as a designer need to take responsibility, and you need to take control of the situation. Raise up those walls. Make it so that they have to walk around or expend extra effort to get around a feature that you want them to pass through. That's your control as a designer. That's your job. Here's how we can fix this problem. And now this is obviously a completely different setting, so I want to just get that out of the way now, but it does illustrate some notable elements of control that were expressed through the creation of this space. So we can assume that point A is going to be in the bottom left of the image, and point B is going to be somewhere in the background. It's going to be at the end of the path or more. We'll get to that. but we'll notice that certain goals are being expressed in the creation of this space. The user, in certain places, is allowed to step into the planter on the left, but at certain places, it's more difficult. So you'll notice that there's a slight increase in slope. They're looking to create a low, slow pathway. You couldn't drive a car through this. As opposed to this previous slide, you could probably drive a car through this. In this, you can't. It's impossible. Walking speeds only. And running speeds, they're a bit dangerous, but it's still possible. It's an intention that's being expressed. It's the speed that you should be walking through this pathway. Okay? That's the intention of this. So, say that you're a gardener and that you're looking to go and perform maintenance on the sprinkler system, the light over here in this this planter over here. You're looking to maybe replace some of the topsoil or that mulch. You can actually step over this pathway, okay? And that's a key option that's afforded to the user. They allowed it, but they also made it so that it's a bit more difficult to step over here. You know, it's not a simple act, but it's also not an impossible act. That's an active decision by the architect or the designer or the landscaper, whoever decided to make the pathway this way. They also didn't want the user to look over in, their neighbor's yard. I mean, it's just rude. People don't want to be constantly spied on, and they want to have some privacy. They want to go about their lives without worrying that someone's looking over their shoulder. So a designer created a block. They created the fence. They created the, they did not afford the user the ability to look over the fence and to look into the private lives of their neighbors. That was a decision. That was an active decision. This is something that you, as a product developer, as a designer, and as a UI developer, you have the ability to do this as well with typography, with text, with menus that control the user. And like a stone pathway that you carve yourself, you have the ability to control the nuances of the A to B experience. You know, say that you want to route them through a gift shop. Well, make the exit that they have to go through accessible through a gift shop, you know. But we'll get back to that. Other thing of note, it's pretty low maintenance. You'll notice that these steps are not a lawn. And now, you can imagine that the owners of this park, they are probably going to have to redo this lawn here. You know, it looks pretty ugly. It's a dirt path now. But this is not lawn. They have decided that it's going to be low maintenance. They want that rock path to be there for a while, and it's going to be there for a while. As they go about their experiences on this garden here, they're going to be remembering who this is for. Now, who is this for? Is this for the neighbor? Is this for any of these random or sometimes intentional populations on the right side of the screen? You really don't know. But you're probably going to assume that it's going to be people who own the house or gardeners or people that are going to be accessing this space. In a park, you have to assume that it could be anybody, and so it's going to be accessible by pretty much every member of the population. But in this, you can't assume that. But you can reasonably assume that it's going to be the house owner. So let's move on a little bit into something a little bit more relevant to UI development and UX development specifically. Let's go into restaurant menus, because this is a pretty interesting subsection of what you're going to be doing as a UI developer and as a UX developer. Menus are they're like a proving ground for UI designers. There's quite an art to this. And so we can examine these two menus, and then we'll get to my favorite menu. We're going to come back to it. It's good. But we can notice the ways that those three terms, the empathy, the affordances and the contrast are being controlled, okay? They are being controlled in unique ways for each of these menus, and then in expert ways in the next menu that we'll get to. So let's analyze this. Let's analyze the menus on the left, on the right, and just go in order, okay? For this Italian menu here on the left side, we can notice that there are 3 groups, the breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We can distinguish them by the way that these spaces are allocated and differentiated by a break in the text. They're creating contrasts between the groups, okay? There's that white space that contrasts with these thin and thick fonts. We know that there's supposed to be a difference between these because of this space, because of the contrast between the text. This is important. This is an element of control. They are affording you the opportunity to focus on one subsection at a time if you want, or all of them at once, because you as a perceptive individual can distinguish between these types of text. If you want to understand the details of the ham and egg breakfast, you have the ability to look here, and you can distinguish between this text and all of the other texts, but you can, well, you can go and perceive it. It's a matter of experience, and it's a matter of processing, and it's a matter of an affordance that was given to you by the menu designer. So let's go back into this right side here. So what we have is a very dense menu. We have a lot of options, okay? And they're quite close together. So one of the things that's going to happen when you have the same typography, I mean, sure, different colors, but when you have the same font used for the body and the title, you're going to run into issues. Notice how on the left you have the font being different for the logo. I mean, I think there is actually, oh no, let me back up. No, I take that back. Let's just focus on the body text for now. So this font here is going to be different from this font here. You notice that, but it creates a difference between an obvious title font and what we really care about, which is the body font, which is telling you more about the objects, well, not the objects, the dishes that you're looking to order. That's an element of control. You are creating contrast. This tertiary font here is pretty low in contrast too. It blends in with the background. Elements of control. The contrast was controlled. This is highly contrastive. You notice these titles first, this second, and this third. And this is somewhere in the middle. You notice this around halfway between when you notice the title font for the dishes and the descriptive texts for the dishes. Elements of control. It's contrast that's being played with. It's contrast that's being controlled, and that is design. Design is intention. You are intended to go from this section to this section to this section, and maybe to this section if you wish, in that order. On the right side, this is a bit muddled because there are only ever going to be 2 different types of font that you could ever really find here. 3 if you want to count these little half and full options here. One little note here, there are certain sections that say FUL and certain sections that say FULL. Don't know why. I hate that. There's also certain sections that are underlined, certain sections that aren't, certain sections that are white, and certain sections that are yellow. It's all over the place. Certain sections aren't even unlabeled. Oh, well, they don't even have the half or full option, so never mind about that. But you'll notice that it's an inconsistently applied method of control. And that, people notice that. People notice when you're not consistently, like, you're not giving them a consistent experience. There's an element of respect in an experience like this. You as a user, kind of sense that a user, or well, not a user, a designer isn't necessarily giving you the respect that you deserve as a user. It comes off as sloppy. It reduces your earned respect. We need to maintain it. We need to make sure this is all consistent. We need to make sure that there is a consistent flow, something that contrasts heavily. This white font on the black background might seem like a good contrast, but it's grouped so close to the other options that when you as a user look at this, it's fairly straightforward to just kind of blend all of these together because they're grouped together. They're very close by. And when they're close by our very perceptive qualities, we group them together because they are together. There's no separation. I mean, sure, there's a black space separation, but it's a consistent separation. And you don't have, in like this example on the left, you don't have some sort of separation, which there is a descriptive text there in the bottom, but it also functions as a way of differentiating. It's like a line and descriptive text. It's important. It's an element of control. So let's move on here to my favorite. This, oh my God. Look, it's not only because I'm Californian, it's just that this is great typography. But this menu is brilliant. This is the In-N-Out Burger menu. It is absolutely brilliant. It takes into consideration everything. And I'll go back to these terms that I didn't necessarily go through on the previous page. The ones on the left side of this screen here were also in the center of the previous screen. But in this menu, we're going to touch on each of these topics because they are expressed immaculately. There is such clarity in this design. There is not a single bit of text that isn't readable to the level that the designers want it to be. Sure, there might be cursive text, but that cursive text is almost, and by almost I mean in every instance, not the dominant focus. So let's just back up here, because what are we as users looking to do with our time here at In-N-Out? You're getting a burger. That's what you're doing. It's not called In-N-Out Burgers for no reason, okay? It's called In-N-Out Burgers for a reason. That reason is because that's what they do. Like, it's so circular, and that's because, yeah, it is. You put the user in the position where the first thing they see, the highest contrast is the rest of the menu and the text. That tells you which types of burgers and fries you can order. Sure, fries aren't a part of the In-N-Out Burgers title, but they want to create that. They want to create the association between burgers and fries. And fries are extremely profitable, and so what they're doing is they're creating this affordance. They're creating this profit. They're doing this because they want to, because they're controlling what you see and what you are going to order. They want you to order burgers and fries. And that's it. The highest contrast, the most contrastive element of this menu is also the most clearly expressed. This is the most straightforward text imaginable. It is not cursive. It is sans serif. I mean, that's more of an artistic thing. I haven't gone over that term yet, so just don't even worry about that. But it is this font that it's so straightforward and unambiguous that there is no possible way that anyone could ever look at this. And we'll get to that as well. There's no possible way that anyone could ever look at this and not immediately be drawn to those 4 options in the top left. It's so clear. And then you have this pecking order of information. You have the burgers, you have the beverages, the shakes in the bottom right and the top right, and then you have the prices. Not necessarily as important. They want you to know that you should focus on what you're ordering. That's because that's the most contrastive, ordered by the least contrastive, which is going to be the lighter text that says the lemonade is, fresh and sweet. Look it over at this text here. It's pretty low contrast. It's pretty small. It's a difficult font to read. They don't want you to focus on that. They're controlling that information, and you have to do that as well. So at this point, repetition is one point that I'd like to continue on to. This block of text here wouldn't be as successful in accomplishing its goal of selling you burgers if it was broken up in, well, like 2 different sections, for example. Like, let's say that this French fries option were moved down here to the bottom of this page, and this block of text with the 2,000 calories a day was moved up to where the gift cards available slot was, and then this is all shifted up 1 slot, and then this is shifted down a slot. It just modified a little bit mentally. What would that do? You'd be breaking it up, and you'd be disvaluing, and you'd be breaking this block that you're looking to create as the solid foundation of your business. People respect and people acknowledge repetition. It implies similarity. It implies unity and strength. You have 4 units, or just a Star Trek thing there. You have 4 units in repetition. You create that association together because, well, they're consistently contrasting. If we go back to this menu here, we understand that the group of breakfast items are together because they're repeated 4 times, and they're repeated in the same manner. There's this type of text for the ham and egg, there's this type of text for the bacon and cheese, and there's this type of text for the tuna salad and the beef soup. And then each of those is followed by the same exact type of pricing and descriptive text. It's consistent, it's repetition, it's telling you that it's the same group. And even on this lower quality side here, we'll notice that these are unambiguously the same group. We already touched on typography here. Color is less applicable here, but it is relevant because the red and white implies an acknowledgement of color theory. Now, I don't have time to go over that into too much detail right now, but I do want to acknowledge that color theory is an element of marketing that needs to be considered quite heavily in relationship to who your user is. Red and white is extremely friendly. It's approachable. I think it's almost a universal color type. It's so, well, I would say it's ordinary, but it's just a very friendly color palette that they have here that I would have almost a difficult time dissecting it because of how ordinary it is. It's not looking to do anything special. It's not looking to be anything utterly revolutionary, but it is approachable. So, worth considering. Now, the last element is one that I haven't touched on as much, but physicality is an important aspect to consider. Physicality refers to an acknowledgement of the context that a user is experiencing a menu or a piece of information. Physicality might refer to your place in line, that you're looking at this menu and trying to decide your order. Or it might also be acknowledging that, yes, you are on your phone, or you're on your laptop, or you're on your desktop, or you're on your Windows 95 box. I mean, it really doesn't matter too much, but it is an element to consider. Is it possible to read each member of this text from every point in the intended place that it's going to be experienced? Could you stand at the end of the line and read this, or could you stand at the very on the outside of a street corner and read this from a block away? I mean, obviously not, but what if you're designing a enormous banner ad and you need to make something extremely visible? You need to make sure that the contrast is properly controlled. Let's put it like that. You need to make sure that the contrast is properly controlled. If this were too big or too small, that would indicate that the designer has not properly controlled everything on their design to allocate or to properly control a user's experience from their intended point of experiencing it. If you're designing something to be viewed from a line and an in and out, it needs to be that needs to be taken into consideration, and in this case it was. So in reality, I mean, this is being viewed from a restaurant, but maybe it's not. That needs to be considered. So let's move on a little bit to kind of briefly continue on here. I'm going to give some more brief questions you can ask yourself during your development process. And these are in every instance. I can guarantee you, in every instance, they're going to be different. They're going to be unique answers and questions and solutions for every one of these types of questions. And maybe you might not even have a necessity of asking these questions. Maybe you might not even have time to ask these questions because it's a project that has a strict deadline. But if you ask yourself these questions and have consistent and high quality answers, I mean, sure, high quality is like distinguishing bad design and good design, but you know, that is what that is. Just have the answers and just try. Because if you ask yourself these questions and you find that you have a hard time answering one of them, maybe you could, well, boost your skill or boost your experience a little bit. It's when I said like design is a polish rag that you apply to a product, asking these questions and finding the answer or developing an answer is going to be how you polish a product. That is that movement. That is that process, that continual process. That it's not a static solution. You ask these questions, you find the answers as a team, as an individual product designer, you're going to be good to go. I want to actually give a real special shout out and kind of loop back to the initial challenge here, because we had talked about UI UX for restaurants in the age of COVID. Let me share an experience with you. When I went to Blazing Bagels, or I believe it's some sort of bagel shop here in Redmond, there was one particular design decision that I love that stood out to me extremely significantly, as it was a solution to a problem that COVID had introduced to the world. It was using one of these kiosks here, and these are, well, they're no contact, you know, because obviously the point of COVID is that you minimize contact. You're looking to design out the point of contact and the point of spread of COVID. That's what you're trying to do. Well, in this case, Blazing Bagels, they did two things that I really liked. They asked you directly if you would be willing to put in a tip. And, you know, people generally will, when responded to a question or a request for something, they'll actually go along with it. Because much like in the psychological experiments where people, when asked to comply with authority, often will comply with authority, they just kind of circumvent the point of contact, where users, in using one of these kiosks, will say, do you want a tip? And then tap which option. They've made more money and removed COVID contact with one fell swoop. And that's genius design. And going through the thought process of how you make decisions like that is just a matter of taking that polish rag and applying it. You're considering the situation. You're considering the context. Like, let's look back at this. Context over here. The context of this situation is that during COVID times, you, as the people operating Blazing Bagels, are looking to make more money. So you decide that you're going to control the affordances of the user. They don't get to decide which type of tip that you give them. You ask them, I mean, you do control it, but you create a more nuanced situation. And it's brilliant. It's utilizing their aspects of their, let me rephrase that, their control of a situation to make more money and to remove COVID contact. And I'm going in loops here because it's so brilliant. And the next thing that they did, which I always really admire, was they had these card readers in the bottom right here of this image. These little white things that you insert the card into, and then you pull it out again after it's done reading. They don't move. normally they are not mounted to anything really, and then they just kind of shift around, and there's going to be an employee that's going to hold it down while you insert the card, and it feels really awkward, and it's kind of uncomfortable really, because then you have to like leverage something to like pull it out, or the employee needs to touch it, and then there's COVID spreading. They just took the little bit of time to completely eliminate a COVID spreading source. They just mounted that little piece of hardware to the countertop. No one has to, like leverage or struggle just that extra second and, potentially spread COVID through touch. They just used a piece of hardware and eliminated the source of COVID contact with just some adhesive material. It's brilliant. So let's move on here after I take a quick swig of water. Okay. Let's go over some practical tips here. Say I had, and I'm using I as an example here. Say we as designers are looking to solve problems around COVID. Imagine the impacts of your decision. Say when we're solving that problem that Blazing Bagel solved with the adhesive and the card reader. Say that problem isn't just as simple as applying adhesive strips to the bottom of a card reader. Say it's installing a automatically opening and closing door, for example, like a revolving door. The financial impacts of your decision are a factor in considering whether or not the design is properly expressing itself, okay? And this is nearly impossible to define in unvague terms, or terms that really aren't just a almost subjective experience or a subjective judgment, but say you had to spend there's this classic I think it's a space age experiment, or it's this development that the United States and Russia went on simultaneously. I mean, space age, they were looking to develop a writing utensil, something like one of these, mechanical pencil or a pen or whatever, for astronauts. And so the United States, they spent thousands of dollars, an enormous amount of time, a significant amount of time looking to develop one of these writing utensils for astronauts. And they came up with this pen. Astronauts could use it. There's no gravity in space, so the ink wouldn't properly flow. The Soviets just used a pencil. That was it. They took a second. They realized the implications of their decision. They just thought about it a little more. And there's no way of expressing the intelligence of that decision that the Soviets made without really acknowledging the fact that they just sidestepped that spending and solved the problem better than the Americans. I mean, that's good design. That's good design. That's it's just smart, and it's so simple to say that, right? It's so simple to say, like, they just used a pencil, but imagine the epiphany of those Soviets and saying, like, look at this problem we're trying to solve. I mean, we could spend all of this money and try to develop this thing, but we could just use a pencil. It's simple. And making things simple and making things clear, that's how great design expresses itself. Don't spend a whole lot of money. If you have to, it better be some amazing design. It better be amazing. Just be aware of that. And this next point here, the second point on this slide, is going to refer to one of those three terms that I really I'm really trying to nail home here. I'm nailing them down because the context of a software is that you need to acknowledge that the people using it include the business. If you got to spend a ton of money on a product and it isn't useful, It might not be worth it. Someone could shoot it down and say, we'd rather keep this money and use it for something better. So don't bring forward ideas that are going to just completely disrupt a business on chance. Just take a second and be aware. Okay. More tips and tricks here. Documentation. Documenting problems in general. It's your best friend. It allows you to track the sorts of problems that need to be solved. When you write down an idea and when you kind of acknowledge that an idea exists, you start to think in terms of that problem. You start to acknowledge that it is not only a problem that exists, it's a problem that needs to be solved. And so then you start to view your business, or you start to view your product in the context of that problem. And then you start to look for ways of poking at the problem. And if you say something out loud and you just don't repeat it, what happens is it's like someone slaps you. You know, you slap someone and then they feel it in the moment and then it fades quickly and you don't remember it unless, like, maybe they slashed you with a knife. Like, see, people remember the cuts, and that's a bit graphic, but it's an impact, and it's a continuous reminder of a challenge that needs to be overcome. So continually remind yourself of it. Make sure you continually polish. You continually remind yourself to try to polish. If you can't continually remind yourself to design, the design will eventually be overtaken by the development and the processes of time that'll erode your carefully constructed efficiency. And it's tricky, and it's a hard-fought uphill battle that never ends, but it's a worthwhile fight. And I think it's inevitably a very satisfying fight, and a very satisfying process, and a very satisfying life to continually try and improve things. Take a little bit more water here. Okay. So, with the second point here, we're getting a little bit more into the UX side of, controlling a user and their affordances. And this is frankly sociopathic. It is manipulative, and as a UX developer and as a UI developer, you are the manipulator. I mean, that is what you're doing. You're manipulating your user, and you're controlling their perception of their experience. You need to make sure that when a user enters your world, that you guide them through the path that accomplishes both of your goals. If your goal is to make money, if your goal is to prevent them from getting COVID, just assume that they're interested in preventing COVID, or assume that they're interested in giving you money. And then if they want to back out, sure, you can't really control that because, anyone can close an app anytime. Anyone can just log out of some account or some sort of website window where they can walk away from your business, never to return. But just assume that they are interested. Assume that they want to prevent COVID. Assume. Because with this confidence and with this type of assumption, what you can do is you can, in this kind of like laboratory assumptive way, you could just plop them into this purchase opportunity for them. You could say, like, hey, you know what? You seem interested in going and signing up for more opportunities to get newsletters, right? I'm sure you are, and if they don't want to, it's okay. It's a strategy. There's no definitive way of, applying or introducing this, but don't be afraid to research it. And that's one of these things that I'm going to go over in just a second. Don't be afraid to research implementations of any of these problems or solutions, or really anything, really, because we live in 2021. The internet is so prevalent and information is so accessible. Go and find that information, and just find it, you know? I mean, like, don't copy, obviously. Like, you don't want anyone to sue you or anything, but just give it a shot. Just try and find some information. If you go out and try to find a problem or find a solution, you'll eventually probably find one. I mean, it might be extremely difficult or impossible, but just give it a shot. It's a worthwhile pursuit. So this last tip is that it's kind of like what we had talked about with those two menus. Submenus, shortcuts. Okay, so let's back up here to this slide here. So let's say that instead of a physical menu that you're holding, you're on an app or something. And let's say you're looking at this breakfast menu here. And let's control this a little bit more, right? Let's just give it another design pass and make this just a little bit more accessible and a little bit more friendly to a user. Let's break it up. Let's say that instead of one page, we'll break it up into 3, and then 3 different pages. So the first page is going to have breakfast, lunch, dinner. Simple decision. 3 options. You know what's going to be, well, you reasonably know, but you can make safe assumptions about what's going to be a breakfast dish, what's going to be a lunch dish, and what's going to be a dinner dish. You're not going to find an omelet in dinner, and you're not going to find a burger in breakfast. I mean, I wish I would find those in those subcategories, but that's just my personal preferences. It's a safe assumption. And what you should do is then allow them to then go into the submenu breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You are taken to a separate screen. You've eliminated the other possibilities from even being considered. You only have one choice of 3 and then one choice of 4. Whereas with this one menu, you constantly see the 12 choices. And really, breakfast, lunch, and dinner is one choice, sure, but you can easily exit that frame of thought, that group, that visual group, and just continue back to the full scope of this menu. You could continue to the breakfast, lunch, and dinner all at the same time. These submenus are your friends. They will allow you to control the user. Use them. Use them and make sure that you don't crowd the user's screen. Just simplify things just a little bit. You're gonna do great. Remember, I had said that this was a continuous process. You're eventually going to get to the point where you've applied this polish rag to the point where you can't simplify anything more. Don't worry about it. You don't have to add another submenu. You don't have to do any of this. Really, what you're trying to do is you're trying to polish a product, because design is polish and design is intention. And when you apply too much intention, when you apply too little intention, it's entirely dependent on how you've done it. And so just do it. Just give it a try. Just go out there and try, and go out and make what you're going to make, go out and try to develop what you're going to develop, and I'm sure it'll come out great. Okay. Lastly, we're kind of touching on this a little bit. I want to go and just clearly state research. Okay. Stated it. Go and do it. Find references. Find examples. Make sure you show your developers, make sure that you keep them in the back of your mind as examples to follow. People need examples. People like examples. There's also the Game UI database. Now, I'm not going to really include the links here, but if you just Google Game UI database, you're going to find a reference sheet or a reference website that allow you to see game user interfaces. Now, these integrations and these, let me actually rephrase that, these implementations of UI are reference points for you to take into consideration when you decide the direction that you want to go in for your UI. Dribble is another resource that you should check out, but take with a bit of grain of salt, because there's a lot of showboating there. And same with Behance. There's some very professional looking UI resources there, but just take them with a grain of salt and you'll be fine. YouTube is also another information stream, and filled with information on how to specifically develop features, or on how other people have done what you might want to do something similar to, which it's entirely up to you. It's how you use those polish rags and those tools. Design is a mindset and a language, and these are just examples of people expressing themselves. So I want to thank you all for coming to this stream, and I want to thank you all for listening to what I have to say, and I want to especially shout out the Redmond STEM Center and their generous opportunity that they gave me for, for streaming here. I had a great time, and I'm going to be wrapping up here, but thank you. Feel free to leave any comments. There's a Discord link to the Redmond STEM Center up in the top right of your screen, and as well as their Instagram account. And in the bottom left, you'll see my information there. Don't worry about it. I hope you have a great day, and I want to thank you for listening to the talk, and hope you have a great project experience, man. I mean, you're going to do great. I'm sure of it. Take care. Bye-bye.